This is going to be the biggest cluster, you know what, in the history of the world. I think this is going to be a complete mess. Literally, if this goes into full force, you're talking about moving into a slavery system where essentially your life can be controlled by people who make the rules very centrally and stripping you of any constitutional rights or property rights. We are taking an enormous amount of our personal and family wealth and putting it towards building a panopticon prison that's going to be used to control us. It's frightening.
The question, though, is this by design?
The master plan is to implement total control and to run a society with two sets of rules, one for a small group of oligarchs. So you have one group of people who apparently think they're going to live forever, and then you have another set of rules for everybody else, and you want to put them on a trajectory to steadily decline in terms of number of population.
When you speak of these oligarchs, who are they? What evidence convinces you that this is a coordinated effort?
They're a couple of years away from getting the basic infrastructure, underground cables, data centers, getting it all working. I think they are a couple of years away from getting the digital ID system really tight. I think they're moving very quickly on programmable money, particularly the stocks and bonds and the bank deposits. And so that is moving very fast. If you suck all that money out of local economies and out of the tax base, you implode the economy.
Are these political leaders pawns of what you consider is the master behind this plan? Are they actively involved? Are they fighting against this? How do you see all of this working with the current political leadership?
It's a public-private partnership, and it's much more terrifying than CBDCs because you have complete non-accountability. Take no comfort whatsoever. And if anything, it's a distraction and making you think that you're safe when you're not. If we fail and they get a complete control grid, that's not a world I want to live in anyway.
This is The Real Story with Michelle Makori.
Hello, I'm Michelle Makori, and this is The Real Story, where we go beyond the headlines and beneath the surface to show you what is really happening with money, markets, and power. And my next guest has spent decades examining the very intersection of money, power, and government, pulling back the curtain on the forces shaping our financial system. A few people have had a closer look from both inside and outside the system. Catherine Austin Fitts was Assistant Secretary at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development under George W. Bush. She was also asked to, but declined to take a position as a Fed governor. She's also a former managing director and member of the board at Dillon Read & Co., one of Wall Street's historic investment banks. So she's had a front row seat to how the sausage is made. And Catherine is currently the publisher of the Solari Report. She has spent decades investigating government finance, central banking, covert systems of control, the rise of digital currencies, and what she describes as the financial coup taking place behind the scenes. Catherine, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
And it is great to have you, Catherine. I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite some time. I've been following your work for a while now, and there is so much to discuss and dissect. I'm very excited to have you on for what is going to be a scary, sobering, but very necessary conversation for our viewers. Now, we can't cover everything that you discuss in this episode, but we will start off with establishing the big picture. And Catherine, you have been warning for years now that a digital control matrix is being built around us as a digital prison, a world where more and more of our lives are tracked, monitored, and ultimately controlled through technology. And the walls of that prison, as you've described them, include digital identity, programmable money through a central bank digital currency or stable coins, AI, collections of enormous amounts of data, as well as digitally connected infrastructure from electric vehicles to smart devices to robotics. Now, again, none of these things sound threatening on their own, not at all. In fact, they sound like progress, convenient, efficient. They do make our lives easier and better and faster in many ways. But your concern is that while each piece is sold to us as progress, Together, they're building something much bigger, a system that can lead to ultimate Orwellian control. So before we break down the specific elements here, the specific walls, if you will, of the digital matrix, let's start off with the big picture for us. What exactly is the digital matrix that you see being built around us, and why should it concern us?
So the important thing to understand this is essentially this is being built by the central bankers and the people who own and operate the central banks in the Western world. And the way to understand it at the highest level is to appreciate that once the Federal Reserve went into place in 1913, we created a balance of power between the banks running monetary policy and the people's elected representatives running fiscal policy and the executive branch enforcing. So you had this balance of power between the people's representatives and the central banks. What is happening using digital technology is moving to a system where the central banks can control monetary policy and fiscal policy. So we've been told that the American Revolution was fought over taxation with or without representation. What we're talking about when you give central bankers control of fiscal policy is taxation without representation, but complete financial transaction control. So many people say, "Well, what is that?" It's really what happened to the Canadian truckers. Their bank accounts were turned off, their transactions were blocked, the people who supported them were blocked. So we're talking about affecting day-to-day control through a financial mechanism. So how does this happen? How do the central bankers build an infrastructure that will let them take over fiscal policy? There are three legs to the digital control grid, and what you need to do is understand them independently, but then how they work together. The first is programmable money, money that can be programmed and can be used centrally to make rules and enforce them centrally without a human chain of command in the middle, and we can talk about that more. The second is a digital ID because it's very important if I'm going to implement control through digital mechanisms. I need to make sure you're you and Catherine's Catherine and Harry's Harry and Sam is Sam. So you need a very high quality digital identification system, which is interoperable globally. And then the third thing you need the hardware and software infrastructure. So you need the data centers, you need the underground cables, you need the AI to process enormous amounts of data, and you need all the cameras and other items, including satellites, that you need for surveillance. So essentially, you're creating a system that can do surveillance. I can track where you're going and what you're doing and how you're using and spending your money and your time and your resources. And then I can use that data to create incentive systems that encourage you to do what I want and discourage you from, doing what I don't want you to do, and including essentially threatening to turn off your money unless you do exactly as you're told. And so, literally, if this goes into full force, you're talking about moving into a slavery system where essentially your life can be controlled by people who make the rules very centrally and enforce them centrally, bypassing all the current, both the legislature and the courts, and stripping you of any constitutional rights or property rights. So, I know you have one of my favorite clips of a central banker basically telling you that this is what they have in store for you. In 2020, I was watching an IMF panel with the co-host of the show we do called Money and Markets on the Solari Report. And you have to understand, I was raised to be a central banker. So I was asked to join the Fed as a governor. I was raised to be a central banker. And one of the things you're taught in that world is you never speak plain English. You never, you talk pretzel talk, around here. And when it's all over, the audience is like scratching their head and saying, I never understood economics. But you never bluntly tell the truth of what you're doing or what you're planning to do. And so I was watching this panel at the IMF that was online because of the pandemic in October 2020. And Augustine Carsons, who was head of at that time of general manager of the Bank of International Settlements, which is the central bank of central bank. The 63 most powerful central banks are members of the BIS, basically explains what they intend to do And it was the first time in my life I had ever seen a central banker tell the truth, and I fell off my chair, and I said to John, "Oh my god, we have to clip that," and he said, "I've already done it. We've got it." And here it is, so perhaps you could play it.
Yeah, we'll play that.
For example, in cash, we don't know, for example, who's using a $100 bill today. We don't know who is using a 1,000 peso bill today. A key difference with the CBDC is that central bank will have absolute control on the rules and regulations that will determine the use of that expression of central bank liability. And also, we will have the technology to enforce that.
Well, Catherine, that sounds pretty terrifying. And they say when somebody tells you who they are, you should believe them. So
Right.
there he is, laying it straight out there. So we're talking about a system where every transaction can be tracked, every movement can be monitored, every purchase can be analyzed, denied, or not allowed to go through. Access to money, services, mobility, all increasingly depending on digital systems, and it all links back to, I think, the central pillar, which is the money, the CBDCs.
Right. So, or, now what they're doing is they're not gonna use CBDCs in the United States. What they're planning on doing is coming out with stable coins and digital tokens that are programmable in the same way. It's a public partner private partnership, and it's much more terrifying than CBDCs because you have complete non-accountability. If you remember the Twitter government model on censorship, Twitter's saying we're a private company, we're not a
Mm.
government, we're not held to that standard, and the government's telling them what to do, but from behind the scenes, but the government says it's not us, they're a private company that can do whatever they want. So now we're talking about using digital tokens and stable coins in a public-private partnership like that, which to me is much more frightening. A central bank issuing a central bank digital currency has legal obligations to the Congress, it has legal obligations to the citizens, and it can be required to disclose all sorts of information. In the public-private partnerships that are coming into fruition under the stablecoin under the Genius Act, the Clarity Act, and some of the other arrangements, that they don't begin these private parties don't begin to have the same obligation to the citizens that a central bank would. So if you look at the model we're proceeding with in the United States, to me, it's much more frightening than a CBDC.
Before we continue the conversation with Catherine, I want to take a quick minute to thank you all so much for watching and supporting our work. Please make sure to subscribe to the channel and set your alert notifications. And please do share our content. I really appreciate you helping us to grow this community. Also, if you would like to learn more about precious metals and get a customized precious metal strategy that best suits you and your needs, you can reach the expert team of brokers at info@milesfranklin.com. Also, check out the website, milesfranklin.com. Now, back to the conversation with Catherine Austin Fitz. Okay, well, you were one of the first to sound the alarm on CBDC central bank digital currencies, which for our viewers are government issued, controllable, programmable, trackable money. Europe is moving ahead with a launch date for 2030. I believe over 146 countries have them in development. But let's focus on the US for now. Well, the status of a CBDC in the US is a bit unclear. There's some legislation expected to pass Congress that includes a provision that would block the Fed from issuing a CBDC, a retail digital dollar, but that's only until December 31st of 2030 anyway, so it's temporary. And it's tucked into a housing bill that hasn't passed yet, but Republicans were pushing to get that included. We had President Trump issue an executive order banning a CBDC just days after taking office. But again, before we get into the legislative details of the likelihood of this passing and not passing, you're saying we shouldn't take much comfort in anti-CBDC
Take
legislation anyway, because
take
stable
absolute
coins are the real issue here.
take no comfort whatsoever. And if anything, it's a distraction and making you think that you're safe when you're not. First of all, the Fed cannot do a CBDC without authorizing legislation. So you can pass all the laws you want saying that they can't do a CBDC. They can't do a CBDC unless they get affirmative authorizing legislation, which they're not going to get in this environment. It's certainly not now. So that's number one. But number two, it's important to understand CBDC is a currency. So let's step back and talk about what is programmable money, because I want to make sure everybody understands what we mean by this. So let's say you and I do a deal with cash. And that's what I call a two-lock transaction. This is from a wonderful Substack called Escape Key, where he described it as a two-lock transaction. You have cash, you wanna buy something, I have. We both agree, but we both have a lock, which means we both can veto the transaction. The transaction won't go through unless we both, both, permit our lock to work. Okay, that's a two-lock transaction. So a three-lock transaction is where you and I, are transacting, but there's a third party who gets the ability to lock the transaction. So for example, we've had know your customer rules, we've had money laundering rules, we've had sanctions, and increasingly banks are running software that checks what this transaction is, where it comes from, where it goes, and can intercede and put a lock. So the Canadian truckers, that was a lock by the financial institutions. The government requested they freeze accounts, block transactions, and some, but not all of the banks, is my understanding, did that. But I describe that as a manual third block because the the affecting of the blocking or the freezing or the seizing or the burning required a human to receive documents, review documents, make sure they were in compliance with the law, and then affect the transaction. Okay. So when you are doing a manual third lock, Michelle, in the United States, we have thousands of banks. So if you want to put a manual lock that applies to all of those thousands of banks, that's a huge amount of work. You know, you have to send documents, you have to satisfy their general counsel's office, you have to get them to agree, you have to get them to implement. They can make mistakes. It's cumbersome, it's bulky, and it's difficult to do, and so you can only use that manual lock so much, okay? Because it's very cumbersome. Now, what is being developed and what Karsten's is referring to in that video that we just watched is what I call an automated third lock. They are looking for the software to scan the transactions
Mhm.
to be connected, through agents and AI to your surveillance. So, if I say, "Okay, under your health plan, you shouldn't be able to eat pizza," and I discover you eating pizza, your money won't work buying pizza, but if you do get pizza, then I can penalize you by charging a fee or freezing your money. There could be any amount of things. Um, and so what it is able to do is to scan you, and then the AI makes the decision. There's no human involved. That's an automated third lock. And the reason we need such huge data centers is if you're going to do surveillance of people spatially and implement spatial control and financial control, that's an enormous amount of data you need to collect. It's a huge amount of analysis you need to do to then intercede just using the software. That's an automated third lock. And the terrifying thing of that, right now, if my bank exercises a manual third lock against me, so let's say the FBI calls my bank and says, Catherine Osifitz is a domestic terrorist. We want you to freeze her account. Right? So my bank is gonna know I'm not a domestic terrorist and, there's gonna be a process. But let's say they freeze my account. I can call them, I can talk to them, I can get a lawyer, I can go to court, I can do something. I have a way of interceding. When you go to automatic third lock, there's no customer service to call, there's no intercession because my bank wasn't involved. That enforcement of that rule, that scanning, that algorithm, that comes from central headquarters. As Mr. Carson said, we can enforce the rules. We have the technology to enforce the rules. And an automated third lock is frightening, and, it's frightening for the reasons you can imagine. So you have a video of Cash Carey, the president of the Minneapolis Federal Reserve Bank,
Mhm.
talking about why we shouldn't do something like this. Now, he's describing CBDC, but it applies to programmed stablecoin and digital tokens as well. So let's take a look at that.
I keep asking anybody at the Fed or outside of the Fed to explain to me what problem this is solving. I can send anybody in this room $5 with Venmo right now. Right? No, seriously. So what is it that a CBDC could do that Venmo can't do? And all I get is a bunch of hand waving. I get a bunch, well, maybe it's better for financial inclusion. Maybe it's better for cross-border remittances. Maybe. Is there any evidence that it is? And they say, well, what about China? China's doing it. Well, I can see why China would do it. If they want to monitor every one of your transactions, you could do that with the central bank digital currency. You can't do that with Venmo. If you want to impose negative interest rates, you could do that with the central bank digital currency. You can't do that with Venmo. And if you want to directly tax customer accounts, you could do that with the central bank digital currency. You can't do that with Venmo. So I get why China would be interested. Why would the American people be for that?
Well, it's a little comforting that we do have some pushback from some members of our leadership. But before we get into that, I mean, he mentioned China, and I think China is a perfect example because it was the People's Bank of China that initiated this idea with the digital yuan and then linked it into a social credit system and linked it into surveillance infrastructure. So we're seeing a dystopian reality play out in China. And I think if we give some more concrete examples, Catherine, I think that's very useful to crystallize that for the viewers. Like, for example, we've have this whole the carbon reduction narrative, the ESG thing, which is thankfully sort of toned down a bit under this administration. But the idea is that if you've exceeded your carbon output, then your money doesn't work to buy a plane ticket. Or if you've exceeded your carbon output, then you're not allowed to buy meat and you're forced to use lab grown meat only. It only works to allow or not allow certain transactions. And not only that, it becomes an incentive and a disincentive for people to act. People become so scared that they will be locked out of the system and have no recourse for action that it just prevents them from doing things. And then, of course, there's the whole idea of political dissent. You don't want to say anything that could get you knocked out of the system. And we saw things like that happening in the United Kingdom where people were kicked out of the traditional banking system, like, Nigel Farage, for example. All of this becomes just so much easier with a programmable central bank digital currency, which again, around the world, they're working on it, but we'll bring it back to the United States because we do have this language that's working towards a CBDC ban. But let's go back to the reality because you're saying.
So here's the reality. Here's the reality. Right now, you have several implementations happening at the same time. The banks are moving to put their bank deposits on distributed ledger. And once you get, as soon as you move anything on a distributed ledger, it gives you the ability to make it programmable. Okay. And that programming can be good or bad, so it doesn't have to be bad. It could be, you could do all sorts of things with smart contracts that businesses would love to do. So programmable money inherently is not necessarily bad. It's the question of how it gets used. So the banks are moving to put bank deposits on. We know under the Genius Act, stablecoin issuers will start certainly at the beginning of 2027 to do distributed ledger currency, aka as stablecoins. But also DTC, which oversees the archiving of the records for $114 trillion of stocks and bonds, is now has a pilot underway and is moving to put the trading of stocks and bonds on distributed ledgers. So we have bank deposits, we have the stable coins, we have digital assets, in the form of stocks and bonds. And we know the BIS in its process of getting this to go all world has talked about doing the same with real estate. So once my currency and my bank deposits and my stocks and bonds are all on distributed ledgers where they can be made programmable, I can be subject to the equivalent of a social credit system on a very significant portion of family wealth in America. And this is why. So one of the things our company, Celeria, is doing is we've been working with state legislators to put up guardrails. So let me give you an example. The Treasury is now invited, and the regulators have now invited comments on a series of rulemakings about the Genius Act on the issuance of stablecoins. And we've submitted 2 comments on the proposed regulations, and the one we just submitted a week ago we said, software, we want you to incorporate into your regulations that software can scan and recommend or put a temporary hold on account, but no account, no money can be frozen, blocked, burned, or seized without the review and decision of a legally accountable human. So machines cannot make these decisions, and centralizers cannot hide behind automated decisions. A human being who's legally accountable has to make the decision. And of course, that throws you back into a world of manual third locks where you can't automate this stuff and then say, it's not my fault. The software did it, and
Mhm.
there's no one to talk to. So 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 we are fighting to put up those guardrails in the regulations and to get states to pass laws that put up guardrails. There are many things we can do to put up guardrails, and I'm always telling people, they say, "Well, we'll do that after we get, the stable coins out there." And I said, "No, you don't build a road and let people use it before putting guardrails out. You put up guardrails before the cars are allowed to drive on that road." One of the most shocking things about this situation is the way you attract people into, money on a distributed ledger is you encourage them because they can either make a lot of money, so you offer them profits, and you make it very attractive to go on, or you make it much more, fun to transact there. So let me give you an example. I can buy a stock or a bond through my brokerage account. Now, what some of the crypto firms are offering is the ability to trade those same stocks 24/7 with margin of up to 20 times. Now,
Big deal.
people always say, "Okay, the bubble's gonna collapse," and I'm like, "No, I don't think you've seen the biggest bubble yet." Because if I can trade $114 trillion of stocks and bonds 24/7, not 8 or 9 hours a day, but 24/7, and I can lever them up by 20 times, I can blow you a bigger bubble than you can possibly imagine, right?
I think a lot of the incentives is something we want to get into, but maybe it's important to explain to the viewers what exactly a stable coin is.
Okay. So a stable coin, the name stablecoin was created when people wanted to use Bitcoin for payments, but the price was volatile. So it was really trading like an asset. There were pump and dumps, so the pricing was volatile. And you needed a coin, a way of making payments where the price would remain stable. And so the idea was create a crypto that is collateralized by an asset which is relatively stable in price. Now, I can collateralize a stable coin with just about anything. But as a practical matter, when you hear people talk about stable coins issued under the Genius Act, which was an act passed last year to create a regulatory framework for this, what you're talking about is crypto, which is collateralized with either very high quality bank deposits or treasury bills, short term treasury bills. And so the price is anticipated to not fluctuate, or if it does,
Mhm.
it's by tiny amounts. Under the Genius Act, a stable coin is primarily gonna be collateralized by 93-day or less maturity treasury bills, and this is a way for the United States to market crypto to people all over the world and get them coming in at retail to finance the treasury market. So we're watching institutions around the world diminish or, not buying treasuries or lowering their treasury positions. That's at an institutional level, and as institutions are rejecting the US Treasury market, this is a way of reaching out at retail and attracting many people out of their local currencies into a dollar currency, but one which will pour that money into the treasury market.
Right. And again, many say that this is a good thing for the US government at large because it creates a fresh source of demand for US treasuries, which allows the government to fund itself. It also, you could say, allows the US to maintain, dominance on a global stage when it comes to crypto innovation. But as a private American citizen, why should I be concerned about stablecoins? Like, I get why I should be very worried about a CBDC, but if I'm using stablecoins as an intermediate in crypto, I mean, I get why people overseas want them as they see their own fiat currencies depreciate. All fiat is debased, but dollar's still the cleanest shirt in the dirty laundry basket. If I use a stablecoin like USDC from Circle or USDT from Tether, I'm not buying groceries with it. I'm not actually using it right now. So walk me through the mechanism, how we get from today's stable coins, which again are private, largely being used for payments and settlement, cross-border payments, international remittances, crypto trading settlement. Um, Talk me through how it becomes as dangerous as a CBDC.
So I'll give a real life example. We had a regime change operation, the United States and Israel, and Secretary Bessent, Secretary of the Treasury, spoke about the fact that they had successfully driven the value of the Iranian currency down 94% as a, I call it the financial bazooka. So they drove the Iranian currency down. When that happened, many people went to crypto to try and protect the value. So if the value of your currency is going down 94%, where can you go? So many Iranians were investing in crypto. And then during, I think it was approximately 3 weeks ago, Basan announced that they had seized $1 billion of Iranian wallets. So you went from a currency that's driving in value, you move to essentially what was probably a stable coin or something like a stable coin, to protect the value of your currency, and what happens? It gets seized. Because in essence, it's programmable money, it's on a distributed ledger, it's digital, and it's easy. If they had gone to gold, the gold would still be in their pockets, right?
Right, but an American, right? And I get that it's a very sort of narrow-minded perspective here, but as an American, I'm not being forced to use stable coins, at least not at this point.
Right,
You're saying I shouldn't take any comfort in the fact that may or may not be a temporary ban. Again, whether this legislation goes through is legit is a whole
right,
other
right.
conversation. But let's just say, okay, we can maybe breathe a sigh of relief on a CBDC at least until 2030. As a private citizen, how am I going to be forced to use
So
stable coins?
that's
Why is it more
that's an
dangerous?
excellent question. If you look at model legislation, our model legislation says you cannot require, and so this is within a state, you cannot require somebody to use programmable money. You have to give them a non-programmable money alternative. It's one of the most important reasons to keep cash alive. So you can't force somebody into a programmable money system. And the other thing it says is you can't use programmable money. You can't sneak into the terms and conditions something that essentially destroys their constitutional rights. So that the innovation in programmable money can be limited to things that free people choose because they wanna use it. And that's what you wanna do. You want people to be free to use programmable money, but you wanna make sure it can't be used in ways that squeeze them, trap them, or limit what they ultimately limit their ability to use their own money.
But these are guardrails that you're trying to put in place. They're not in
Right,
place at the moment.
right.
And, we talk about cash, and I think that's a very big distinction to make here because if I hold cash today, I can spend it privately. I can do what I want with it. Nobody's really tracking it. Cash is king. We are seeing that it's declining in terms of use. I think cash payments accounted for just 14% of consumer payments in 2024 in the United States. I don't have the latest data. The latest we have is from 2024. And you know what is terrifying to me, Catherine, is that starting next year, the European Union will begin enforcing rules that effectively ban cash transactions over 10,000 euros across the
Right,
bloc. Now,
right.
they say that this is designed to combat money laundering, financial crime, whatever. But this is reducing financial privacy. It's increasing oversight of how people spend their money. I mean, EU member states will actually have the power to impose even lower cash limits. 10,000 euro is just the starting point. So beginning in 2027, you cannot pay for cash when doing a transaction over 10,000 euro by law in the European Union. And the EU is pushing aggressively for a CBDC by 2030. So again, I get that I'm focused on the US, but also focused on the European Union.
Right.
And maybe that's sort of the first area where we can see this really playing out. Explain what that would look like if you have a CBDC by 2030, and cash transactions effectively outlawed over 10,000 at
So
least.
so here's what it would look like. If you're in an all digital system, and whether it's stable coins and digital tokens or CBD, it's all the same programmable thing. Let's watch, when the Brit card debate was happening in the UK, somebody made a video showing what it would be like to walk around and live in the world you're describing. So let's take a look at the Britcoin video and it'll give you a feel.
This is a restricted access for Brit card holders only.
I don't have a smartphone. I didn't register for the Brit card. I'm sorry.
Stop right there. You do not have a Brit card. You are under arrest.
You don't have a Brit card? Then I'm afraid we can't offer you treatment. Another large wine, please.
Sorry, hun, your Brit card says you've exceeded your alcohol quota for this week.
You what? You don't have a Brit card? Then I'm afraid you're fired. I'm afraid your Brit card says you have exceeded your carbon footprint for this month and you will not be permitted to purchase any more fuel. I'm sorry, sir. According to your Brit card, you've reached your flight quota and surpassed the government's emissions target. I can't let you on this flight. It looks like you're trying to check out logic, but I'm afraid that book has been withdrawn.
I'm just trying to get home.
You know, Catherine, I watched that. I literally get shivers down my spine because that is so terrifying. It is so scary. And that leads us to another essential wall of this digital prison, and that's digital ID, digital identity. Um,
Mhm.
why is that so important? Make the link for us between this digital ID and the programmable currency.
I need to know you're Michelle. I need to know this is Catherine and not get those mixed up. And it needs to be interoperable globally because you're talking about millions of transactions and millions of surveillance data at very high speed being analyzed. And so it's important to get people, one, in an all digital system. It's important that they participate in the digital system and consent to participate in the digital system, and they do that by getting a digital ID and the smartphone or the other sort of mechanical device they need to interact digitally. But then I need to make sure that I have got connected to that digital ID the data I need to absolutely make sure that that Catherine's Catherine. So I have their biometric information, I have their fingerprints, I have their eye scan, I have all the data to make sure that that person is that person, and that they can't slither out by hiding behind a VPN or hiding behind a fake person or anything else. So the whole automation depends on, being able to identify and interact with each person in a digital way. In other words, I'm looking to create a digital twin system, and it needs to be exceptionally high quality.
Okay, just to play devil's advocate here, people can say, look, we need digital IDs. They help reduce fraud, help secure voting. That's been a big push in the United States that you have conservatives going for this because you want to have secure voting, helps verify people, who they are online. And those all sound like very reasonable goals, especially,
Can I tell
secure
you something?
voting.
It's totally unreasonable. It's completely ridiculous. I mean, I have to tell you, I remember living in a world where there was no digital technology. We had tight borders, we had fair elections, unless you had a corrupt system in your ward, and you didn't need digital technology. I worked on Wall Street. I used to swing around billions of dollars every day with landlines and number 2 pencils, right? So you don't need digital technology to run clean elections. You don't need digital technology to have tight borders. The more we load this digital technology, the worse the immigration problems become, the worse the money laundering problems come. And if you look at where the election fraud and the immigration problems are coming from, Those problems are not gonna be ended with more digital technology, they're gonna be made worse. So let me give you 2 examples. Um, I used to work with a reporter who studied narcotics trafficking, and I was trying to understand the intersection between mortgage fraud and narcotics trafficking, so I started to help her. And one day, she had her best source at the DEA retire. So she wanted to take him out to lunch. He was somebody she liked very much. So she took him out to lunch to congratulate him on a successful career in retiring. And he said to her over his lunch drink, he said, "Let's face it, honey, all the wires batch and run through the New York Fed. They know where every penny is." Right? So if you look at who's really I have an online book called Dylan Reed and the Aristocracy of Stock Profits, and it explains a lot about how the drug narcotics trafficking in this country really works. You know, narcotics trafficking is not stopped because it's a very important industry. It generates a lot of money, and the people who run it, run the central banking system. This is run from the top, not the bottom. So let me give you another example. You remember the Madoff fraud, right?
I
Okay.
do.
So I was interviewing Helen Chapman, who's an absolutely brilliant New York litigator, financial litigator. She had had money in Madoff, and her business was sort of quiet when Madoff happened. And so she decided she was going to start helping all the victims. And she represented an enormous amount of the victims and did litigation. So I have her on. She wrote a book called J.P. Madoff about the relationship between the Madoff's bank, J.P. Morgan, and the Madoff operation. So I'm in the middle of the interview, and Helen is explaining that Madoff had 2 businesses. He had the brokerage business, he had the asset management business. And in the asset management business from the 90s on, he only had 1 bank account, and that was at JP Morgan Chase. So I said to her, Helen, I said, "Helen, if he only had 1 bank account, who was the custodian, the securities custodian?" And she said, "Well, there was none because he never bought any securities." Now, what that means is that the money went into JP Morgan Chase, and from 1995 approximately to 2008, no money ever left to buy securities, and they knew that the whole time. They knew that the whole time. And in fact, Madoff would leave 6 to 9 billion sitting with no interest earnings, just helping to finance whatever JP Morgan Chase was doing with those deposits. So if you look at where the fraud or the money laundering or the narcotics trafficking or the crime really happens and how it works, you don't need these things to stop it because all it's going to do is give more power to the people who are already running that business.
But, again, just to push back and play devil's
Mhm.
advocate here, the system is now digital. I mean, is the solution to go back to what, 1995 and have
So
paper and stock certificates and
no, 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 no. So the idea is to have options. Remember in capitalism, we love options. We love markets. We love so you read a number of 14% in 2024.
Mhm.
But if you look at my county where I live in Tennessee in the United States, my estimate of people in that, the per capita income in my county is $24,500. You know, m if you look at the elderly, if you look at the very young, if you look at the low income groups, maybe 55% of the people in that county don't have a credit card. If you kill cash, they have no options, right? So there are many, many places in this country and among many, many groups where cash is very heavy and very heavily used,
as it
and
should be.
as it should be. Now, what's interesting is, because I need to go update my statistics, but from what I see, cash is rising in many places, and let me give you an example. First of all, when you're dealing with inflation, you can't afford to pay the money out in fees that you're paying for credit cards and other fees. That's number 1. So, when I spend $100 after 1,000 transactions in a community, it's still $100. When I spend it with credit cards or payment systems, digital payment systems, it disappears. And in inflation, that's a lot of money, especially when you multiply it throughout the community. Okay, so number 2, one of the things we've seen around the world is when we have natural disasters, if they don't have cash, there's real trouble. So in New Zealand, the head of the central bank stood up when the cyclones came through and he said, "Thank heavens we had cash.
Right.
If we hadn't had cash, we'd have been in trouble." And after the floods in Western North Carolina and Eastern Tennessee, the Scandinavian central banks, 2 of them, and they've been the leader. They have been the leader in ending cash, announced, it was a terrible mistake to get rid of cash because we cannot trust that electricity will always work. And that's what we've seen in natural disaster after natural disaster. And you're starting to see people realize, we can't count on electricity, so we need to have cash. So cash is making a revival in certain places in certain ways. And I think it's going
Absolutely.
to be a lot harder to get rid of cash and a lot less practical to get rid of cash.
Well, I would
Um,
hope so. I mean, I'm a big believer that in many ways, cash is king, not in the hedge against inflation way, but my father always made sure he taught me from a very young age always carry emergency cash on you no matter
right,
what. I was in South Africa earlier this year. There was a power outage at the airport. Good thing I had cash on me,
right.
just to help with the transactions there. So again,
So,
I'm a big advocate for having cash,
so
but
I have to tell you, I had the most remarkable experience 2 years ago in Florida. And, I was at a dinner, and there was an entrepreneur there, saying why we should go to an all digital system, and digital IDs were great, and, it was very efficient and all this kind of stuff. And the most beautiful woman stood up. She was my age, but very beautiful, and she was South African. And she said, "I lived in South Africa, and I know exactly what happens when you get a digital ID." And it was very powerful, and the whole room could feel what she was feeling, and they thought, "Oh, this is not good," you know?
look, it's not good, and that's why we have you here to make people aware of this and to make them aware of the digital matrix that's being woven around them. And so I want to, move a little beyond the money side, and let's and the digital ID, and let's bring it into data and the physical infrastructure, the surveillance infrastructure, the robotics, the electric vehicles. Talk us through how all of these technologies then become interconnected.
So if I'm gonna do 24/7 surveillance on you in your car, in your home, in your, transactions, that's a lot of data, 24/7 collection, and the spatial data in particular, a bunch of it, like the flock cameras, is video. So, when you have surveillance data that's video, that's a real data hog. So surveillance requires a lot of data, and then, following all the financial transactions, particularly because stablecoins are gonna be marketed globally, stocks and bonds too. So now we're not just talking about data for 325 million Americans, we're talking about data from all over the world for as many people as can be reached with those systems, because that's what they're gonna try and market to. So you're talking about collecting a lot of data, analyzing a lot of data, and using that data to implement your social credit system is what it's really gonna be. And what's interesting is if you look at the social credit system, I call it the veil of virtue. You try and hide all these rules behind, "Oh, we care about the environment, we care about ESG, we care about, you being kind to other people." There's all sorts of virtues that are used to do this, but when you look at how those virtues applied, they're being applied to assert complete control of capital, but also of labor. And we're in a central banking reset that happens every 80 to 120 years. And one of the things that's always happened in history, from what I can tell, is you assert control of labor, you assert control of capital, and you assert control of travel. And it's those controls that allow you to massively centralize ownership and control of a society. And if you want to take society in a new direction, that's where you amass the fortune that can do it. And this comes upon a period when, in my opinion, there has been a financial coup. You've seen between the money disappearing from the federal government, the bailouts, and the going direct reset, $55 trillion, essentially, in my opinion, drained from the system. So, now building this infrastructure costs a great deal of money. In the United States, we have 5,500 data centers up or being designed or being proposed. And if you look at the money pouring into AI and those data centers, it's fantastic. Um, I was talking about the Kevin O'Leary interview that Tucker did, where he's saying, "Oh, the data centers are privately financed." Sorry, we're working on a big article about how they are financed, and the amount of money that's coming out of people's retirement savings or their taxes, whether at the state, local, or federal level, is extraordinary. We are taking an enormous amount of our personal and family wealth and putting it towards building a panopticon prison that's gonna be used to control us. It's frightening.
Before we continue my conversation with Catherine Austin Fitz, a quick thank you to my partners at Miles Franklin, one of the most respected and trusted names in precious metals for nearly 4 decades. Now, whether you're looking to diversify your portfolio and protect your purchasing power, or simply better understand the role that gold and silver can play in your financial strategy, Miles Franklin has been helping investors do exactly that, navigate the precious metals market for generations. There's a team of experienced advisors and brokers that can help you evaluate your options and make informed decisions based on your individual goals and needs. So contact them at info@milesfranklin.com. Now back to the interview. I mean, it's terrifying. We have digital IDs, in the future, cameras everywhere with facial recognition, surveillance technology, biometrics, controllable digital money, AI gathering the data, as you say, linking it back to the social credit score, and infrastructure that can just be digitally controlled, could just be like turned off with a switch of a button. It can be very, very terrifying. The question, though, is this by design? Is this
Of
on
course.
purpose?
Did you not see Karsten's joy in the thought that he could track every dollar and make the rules of how his money could be used and enforce them centrally?
But is this a master plan? You did say at the beginning of the interview that this is that central bankers are behind this. So
Right.
elaborate on who you do think
So
is behind this.
I'll tell you what I experienced in the '90s, and I described this in my online book, the one I just referred to, Dylan Reed and the Aristocracy of Stock Profits. Um, in the '90s, I remember many people, in the leadership of the financial system saying, "Democracy doesn't work. There's no constituency for financial responsibility, and there's no way we can get this system to manage fiscal policy on an accountable basis." And it's when they made that decision that then the money started disappearing from the federal government. I was, meeting with the top pension funds, or a group of the top pension fund leaders in the country, in the spring of 1997, and I was presenting my plan for how we could re-engineer federal investment in communities to lower the deficit and dramatically improve wealth in America, and but bottom up. And one of the president of the largest pension fund in the country looked at me and he said, "You don't understand, it's too late." I said, "What do you mean it's too late?" And he said, "They've given up on the country. They're moving all the money out starting in the fall." And I thought he meant that we're reallocating the equity in the pension funds to invest in the emerging markets. It never occurred to me that he meant what I now think he meant, which is it was that fall, the beginning of fiscal 1998, that large amounts of money started disappearing from both DoD and HUD, and we know by 2015 that number was 21 trillion. What we don't know is how much it is after that, because during the first Trump administration, Trump and Congress, White House, executive branch, and both sides, the House, the Senate, Democrat and Republican, all agreed to adopt a policy called FASB 56, which basically converts the federal government financials to secret. They can take a portion out and they don't tell you what it is or why they took it out. So when you look at the financials, you don't know what's in and what's out. And it not only applies to the 24 covered agencies, it applies to another 150 governmental entities. And through, I believe, through the classification laws and national security laws, it applies to all the large companies and banks doing business in a material way with the federal government, which means when you look at the large cap stock market or the bond market in America, representing bonds from large cap companies, you have no idea what it means.
So, but is the master plan, though, a digital prison? I mean, I get that we can't really count on government to be transparent and trustworthy when it comes to managing finances, but is the idea really to build this digital matrix?
So I think the master plan is to implement total control and to run a society with two sets of rules, one for a small group of oligarchs. So I don't know if you ever saw the interview after Jared Kushner left the first Trump administration. He gave an interview and he said, given what's happening in biotech, I'm going to be the first generation to live forever, the last generation not to live forever. I just had one of our subscribers have dinner with Steve Wolfram, and Wolfram was saying it doesn't matter that we do the digital control grid because if you look at what AI can do with biotech, we can live forever. So so now, if you can't let 8 billion people live forever because you're gonna have an environmental problem. So you have one group of people who apparently think they're gonna live forever, and then you have another set of rules for everybody else, and you wanna put them on a trajectory to steadily decline in terms of number of population. So I think you're looking at a very long-term plan to reduce the population and create a two-class society where you have the oligarchs and then everybody else, and the oligarchs are free of having to manage everybody else, one, because they have complete control, but they can turn it over to AI and let the AI do it. And then when things go wrong, they can just blame the AI. It wasn't me, it was the AI.
Well, a Malthusian society and that vision, I believe, is something that, has been pushed by the likes of Bill Gates, who's buying up all the farmland in the United
Mhm.
States. And again, just to play devil's advocate here, when you speak of these oligarchs, like who are they? What evidence convinces you, that this is a coordinated effort rather than the natural
'Cause
evolution
I
of
used to
tech and
live
financial systems?
I used to live and work with it. So, you know, I lived in that world, and I watched them become more and more alienated
Who
from the
is
general.
them? Who is them?
So it's the people who run the financial system. At any given time, it's 100 to 1,000 people who run the different key spots in the banks, the insurance companies, the central bank, and the treasury. And if you look at, and that system is very much done by consensus through all these different groups and meetings and everything else. It's very organic um, but I saw them reach a wide consensus that you couldn't trust the average person to behave in a responsible way, and so you had to assert more central control and and essentially by giving people lots of consumer attention and choice, move them out of having any political say whatsoever. So you
Mhm.
wanted to reduce them to the point where their vote or their participation in the political system didn't mean anything, but you wanted to do it in a way where you could persuade them to take all their capital and invest it in a way that you could use it to build in the direction you wanted to build. So right now, if I go to a meeting with people who are trying to stop the control grid and trying to stop a data center, I can get them to pull out their portfolios and I can show them they're financing the very data centers they're trying to stop. So, and I always tell the story, I'm gonna tell it again. I was in a boardroom with a group of very high-powered people in Washington. There was a protest going down Pennsylvania Avenue, and the one of the congressmen said to me, he said, "Let's face it, sweetie, as long as they have a Citibank credit card in their back pocket, what do I care if they walk up and down?"
Hmm.
Right. So, and that's why, our opportunity because, I don't know if you've heard me say this, but I think they're gonna fail. I think this is a vision that they're gonna try and institute. I don't think it's gonna work. I think it's gonna fail. And my concern is it could hurt a lot of people and do a lot of damage before on the way to failing. And so I think it's imperative that we do everything we can to protect ourselves, but we also do everything to
Mhm.
push back in a way that takes us in a positive direction when it fails.
And I do want to get into how people can resist this, what people can do. But before we get to that, I want to focus again on the plan here because one of the names, Catherine, that typically comes up in these discussions is World Economic Forum.
Right.
People hear phrases like the Great Reset that the World Economic Forum set out very clearly. They hear discussions about, stakeholder capitalism, digital identity, digital currencies, increasingly centralized system. And that's the World Economic Forum. You start connecting the dots there. You hear about that famous phrase, you shall owe nothing and be happy. Uh, what role are they playing here, if any?
So my experience with the World Economic Forum, I kind of think of them as the marketing department for the going direct reset. So I see the central banks and the financial guys making the big decisions, and then I see the WEF as sort of marketing them and persuading young people, and I don't see them as being a major player, but they are a way that people get together and build consensus and have these conversations. So, in that sense, they're an important hub where you're trying to reach consensus.
We do hear of certain members of Congress, members of Parliament in the UK as well, pushing back on this. In the United States, you do have some conservatives, Republicans pushing back against central bank digital currencies. Um, we had Trump, as I say, issue that executive order banning a CBDC. How useful it is another question, as we discussed at the top of the show. Catherine, is there anyone on our side? Are these political leaders pawns of what you consider is the master behind this plan? Are they actively involved? Are they fighting against this? How do you see all of this work in with the current political leadership?
So I think there are plenty of people who don't want to see it go this way. I mean, when I was a partner at Wall Street, if a decision was made on high, I would be told, "Look, this is how it's going to go," and you just go with it. You've learned if this is how it's going to go, then we're going to do a waltz, not a tango. So you got to waltz. So a lot of people are just told this is how it's got to go, and they think you can't fight City Hall, and that's their attitude. You can't fight City Hall. At the same time, you have a lot of people realizing where this is going to go and wanting to do something about it. The question is, how do they do something that's effective and not dangerous? Because if you push back, it can get dangerous. So, and that's why it's so important to take to, I would say, state legislatures or the Treasury on the regulations or all these different organizations, lots and lots of plans of how they can put up guardrails and how they can get the good from programmable money innovation without getting the bad. So, for example, one of the model legislation, we have 3 forms of model legislation at Solari. One is protecting cash, one is, putting guardrails up on programmable money, but the third is states passing laws giving people the right to have a non-digital life. This is an idea that came out of Switzerland. You have a group in Switzerland who are trying to pass referendums around, or I think it may be a constitutional amendment, but basically canton by canton, creating an infrastructure that says a citizen has a right to a non-digital life. I shouldn't be forced to get a digital ID or have a smartphone so that I can interact with government. And so these are things we can do. Now, I will tell you, to me, the most frightening thing that is happening in the mix, the people who should be putting up these guardrails and making sure that this doesn't happen are all the people who are building the whole crypto industry and are moving the traditional financial system onto distributed ledgers. If you look at all those technologists who are doing stablecoin, or want to be stablecoin issuers, or all the technologists doing the distributed ledgers to put stocks and bonds on distributed ledgers, who are doing the bank deposits. You have a whole crypto industry in Washington lobbying for the Clarity Act, and we just saw a letter of 200 industry leaders in the crypto space. Just wrote a big letter pushing the administration and Congress to pass the Clarity Act. They are not putting forward any guardrails. They are not putting forward any attempt. And these are people who are making fortunes, building the new distributed ledger financial system. They should be the ones putting up guardrails. I took the 200 uh, firm letter and I retweeted it out on my X account, and I said, if the utility industry had been as irresponsible as you guys, many of our ancestors would have been electrocuted. So, I had an uncle who was a utility executive, and that was an industry that spent a fortune of time and sweat and money trying to make sure that all their systems were safe and some child wouldn't electrocute themselves, in a house as a result of how they did the electricity. The crypto industry is responsible to put up these guardrails, and it's shocking the extent to which they haven't done it, and that I find that amazing because I can't believe they want their children to be slaves or their grandchildren to be slaves. And you can say to me, "Well, I think the chances of the Karsten vision coming true is only 50%." And I can say, "I think their intention is 100%, but let's say you're right, it's 50% or 10% or 5%. Why shouldn't we put up guardrails to make sure that can never happen?" It doesn't matter what the
Right.
percentage chance is. We wanna make sure it could never, ever happen. And the crypto industry, it's time for them to stand up and do that.
Well, the Clarity Act is getting some pushback from the financial industry, but for other reasons because it threatens to eat into their controlling power and interest. So,
I don't think that's it, it's terrifying. I have to tell you 2 of the most terrifying moments that have happened this year is me agreeing with Jamie Dimon and saying he's absolutely right. It's just terror. It's like, "Oh god, what's happened in the world that I'm agreeing with Jamie Dimon?" Um, if you wanna grow a local economy without inflation, if you wanna get powerful growth without inflation, you wanna create as many banks and credit unions as possible. The more good banks and credit unions you have, the more you can grow without inflation because you have somebody creating money out of thin air that is doing the underwriting to make sure it's a sensible investment. And Richard Warner has done 2 amazing studies and plenty of other work that we published at Solari on why banks generate growth without inflation. Now, if you come out with the kind of systems that they're talking about doing under the Genius Act, as well as some of them under Clarity Act, you're talking about a giant sucking sound out of local economies and into the treasury market. And if all the capital on the planet goes into the treasury market and none of it is available for local businesses or enterprise, you're going to collapse the economy. It's not going to be AI that collapses the economy. It's going to be the giant sucking sound of that money into the federal treasury where it can be used and manipulated by a corrupt system in ways that are thoroughly unproductive. That's
well,
what is going to destroy the economy.
you mentioned AI destroying the economy, and that is a big theme right now. Many believe that AI will dramatically increase productivity. Many others say that it could eliminate millions of jobs. And if AI does begin displacing workers on a large scale, that's where governments can step in with universal basic income, with UBI. And typically, you need a good crisis in order to enact some change. I mean, we'll go back to COVID in a minute because I know you said that that was the beginning of the reset here. But before we do that, do you see UBI becoming the mechanism that brings people willingly into this digital financial system?
It,
Because
it
go ahead.
It could yeah, so it could be one way. What we've seen is a general, Sovietization of the US economy. More money goes into the treasury market then puts out money that makes people and companies dependent on the federal government, and you end up with a Soviet economy where 50% or more of a local economy is coming directly or indirectly from federal government checks. And this is very, very bad for productivity. And I know that people say AI is going to put a lot of people out of work, but right now, I don't see AI putting a lot of people out of work. I see it putting some people out of work. I see it creating a lot more work for other people. What I putting people out of work is this Soviet process where you get more and more control from central control and more people dependent on the federal wheel. Now, if you look at who's dependent on the federal wheel, it's a huge part of the economy already. Universal basic income will just extend that even more. And the problem with universal basic income is you will have people on the federal dole who just their skills evaporate.
Mhm.
So, and then they become a real dependency on the economy. And I think if you look at the system, some people in the system would say, "Look, it's cheaper to have them." I had one guy said when he was first telling me about universal basic income in 1998, he said, "It's much cheaper to pay them $600 a month to sit around and watch TV than to have to deal with them in the workplace."
Well, I mean, there are many, many, many flaws to universal basic income, but I think what I was trying to get at is the way of distributing UBI, whatever the reason, be it AI taking away jobs or just this Russian economy expanding, is the UBI aspect the way to force people into the digital currency? You want your benefits? Sure. Download this digital wallet, download the CBDC program or stablecoin program or whatever it is, and that's how you're going to get paid your benefits. And then that's how that money is controlled when more and more people are forced to use it and willingly. And then they go into a store, and if a store wants to take their business, they have to accept the digital UBI, and so it spreads.
Right. So it's just like getting a horse in a stall. If the horse won't come in the stall, you pull out a carrot, you bring it in the stall. And if you look at whether it's the profits on Bitcoin or universal basic income, you're talking about holding out a carrot, a financial carrot to many, many people to get them into your programmable money.
And
Right.
it's not even financial, it's convenience. I mean, 20 years ago, if someone had told me that I would pay for and voluntarily carry a device that tracks my location everywhere, stores my most personal communications, monitors my purchases, what things I'm interested in, knows more about me than most of my family members do, I mean, I would have said, "That's crazy, I won't do that." Like, many people would have found that completely dystopian, but instead, I'm signing up willingly because the benefits of having the cell phone are just so compelling, and now to go a
But
day without my cell phone is so challenging, and a week is practically impossible. So
well,
is
but
that how freedom is typically surrendered, Catherine?
if you send me a mailing address, I will send you one of our Faraday bags. So you can carry it with you, but they can't track you unless you take it out and turn it on,
But
okay?
the question is more, is freedom typically surrendered not through force, but through convenience, through dependency, through efficiency? Is that how they get us?
So here's the thing, they get us in 1,000 different ways, that's one of them, but it's far from the only one. So they get us with honey traps and making it attractive. They get us with convenience. They get us with social prestige and thinking it's fashionable to have a nice sophisticated phone. You know, it's on and on and on. One of the things that they get us on the most is what if you talk to kids about why they spend so much time on the screens, you know what they say? They say,
Interaction?
I wanna be with my friends." Exactly. "I wanna be with my friends, and you won't let me be with my friends outside without your supervision, so I go on the screen." So if you wanna get your kids off the screen, find a way that they can be outside with their friends without you having to, supervise them like helicopter parents. But we want connection and communication, and one of the things that these surveillance devices do is between calling and texting, the amount you can connect with people, there's wonderful and fabulous connectivity. So and what they've done is they've said, "Okay, we'll let you connect as long as we can surveil you while you're connecting."
I mean, sure, there's tremendous benefits and merit to technology and progress. And I guess to your point, it's the guardrails that we need to put in place to enjoy the benefits of all of this, but
Right.
not let it suck us into a system where we give up our freedom. And Catherine, I want to bring it back to COVID because when we think back about that, it just seems insane to me what we put up with as freedom loving Americans. And if COVID taught us anything, it's how governments can abuse power and control society through tactics of fear, through media, through cognitive control, if you will. And I mean, there were curfews, limits on eating out, essential items you could buy, not buy. Again, all of this so much easier to do with programmable money that just wouldn't work at certain hours, wouldn't allow you to buy certain goods. There were certain countries where there were curfews. I know Canada, you couldn't leave the house at 10 o'clock. Well, if you have programmable money, then your money just doesn't work after 10 o'clock. But like COVID taught us that we can be controlled. And those that fight against it are gonna have a very, very tough time doing so. And
So
and you described COVID as the beginning of the broader economic reset. So I want you to tell me what exactly you meant by that.
well, it's very simple. So I'm gonna grossly oversimplify. So here's small business and small farms. They're not publicly traded stocks. Over here are publicly traded stocks, and the big investors can make a lot of money if those stocks go up, okay? So I announce a pandemic and I say, all you small business and farms, you have to shut down. Okay. But the big companies can stay open, which means they can suck up all your market share because they can just take your customers because your customers can't go to you anymore. You're shut down, right? Now you've lost your market, you've lost your customers, you've lost your market share, and now you have valuable assets, but you have no income. You have to feed your family. What do? You start to sell your assets. You sell your gold, you sell your house, you sell your business, and who can buy it? Well, the Federal Reserve injects $5 to $6 trillion directly into the economy. A lot of that money sloshes into Wall Street and the big companies who are having a field day on their new market share, taking away all your customers, and then they can buy up your assets for cheap for those of you who are forced to sell. So it's a plunder. And,
Mhm.
in San Francisco, I think the number was 49% of small businesses went down. I think it was 35% of small businesses shut down, across the country. And if you look at the people who plundered those market shares, it was fantastic. They made a fortune. It was very, very successful.
Yeah, like the Amazons of the world, all of the small mom and pop shops had to close down. A lot of them closing down all over New York City because crime and shoplifting isn't being enforced. So you see all of these stores shut down, and it all goes back to the bigger
Right,
conglomerates. And it's a lot easier to control people when they have fewer options. We need those
right,
independent businesses to give us options, to not
right,
force us into a system where we have
right.
yeah.
So you bankrupted thousands and thousands of families intentionally, and you made a lot of money doing it.
And let's bring it back to controlling the food supply, because you've made
Right.
some interesting points on that as well, how important it is to keep small farmers in business.
Right. So I can, at the height of the Great Depression, there were 3,100 counties in America and 3,100 community currencies. We don't need the Federal Reserve to create currency. We can create a perfectly good fiat currency in a community if you have enough understanding and critical mass. There's a wonderful, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie. It's an old Austrian movie called Shillings from Heaven about a town in the Austria during the Great Depression that created a work certificate system and went from being bankrupt to incredibly prosperous and wealthy because everybody was just trading the work certificate. So we don't need money. We can make our own money. We do need food. We can't invent, you know, I can invent a community currency. I can use my gold and silver as a community currency, but I need to grow food, and food takes a long lead time and to do it well. So it's very important for control to not only control money, but to also control food because if people can grow their own food, then they can figure out how to make their own money. And so food is very critical to control.
Yep, having independent food sources. But talking about community currency, well, some people could say, well, that's what Bitcoin was supposed to be. That's why Bitcoin came about, to offer an alternative to centralized currency. Where Bitcoin has gone to now from where it started, that's a whole other conversation. But in its ethos, essentially, that was supposed to be a peer-to-peer currency, at least if we believe the narrative that
I Let's talk about the narrative here. So if you look at why Bitcoin was created and why it was prototyped, it was created and prototyped to prototype programmable money for the purpose of control. It was never, if you look at the design, it could have been a great global payment system. It could have been a really elegant functioning payment system. Early on, it was hijacked. There's a wonderful book by Roger Ver and Steve Patterson called Hijacking Bitcoin. It's one of the best financial books I've ever read. It's not even about, it's really about technology, but um, Bitcoin was always going to be a prototype for the control grid. Now, there were many wonderful people who didn't understand that and thought it was going to be a sincere effort at building a payment system, and they put their heart and soul into it, and they believed they were going to be free. I'll never forget, I was at a crypto conference in 2017, and all these folks are running around saying, "It's totally private." It's not private at all. I mean, I kept telling them, "Look, if you're doing taxable trades, you better escrow your taxes because they're gonna come after you." And sure enough, when on the next dump, the IRS or the Wall Street Journal announced that the IRS was appointing 10,000 auditors to go after them. But but so you had a lot of wonderful people who thought this was gonna be a great freedom technology, and they didn't understand what they were a part of. So let me just explain. Before that 2017 crypto conference, I was in Zurich on business working with a couple of money managers, and I had to go back over to Zurich. I was in Basel, and I drove by the BIS, the Bank of International Settlements. It's 2017. A lot of the crypto developers are over in Zug, which was an area, where a lot of that was happening in Switzerland. I go into the Swiss railway to buy a ticket on Swiss Railway, and I bring the thing up, and it offers me the opportunity to not only buy my, railway ticket in Bitcoin, but to top up my wallet. And I'm, like, I'm just, like, 1,000 yards from the BIS. And you realize this is not a grassroots phenomena here,
Hmm.
right? This
So you believe that Bitcoin is a Trojan horse to get people to accept digital money? Is that what you
No,
believe?
I believed it was a prototype. And it was a prototype that was used in a variety of ways, and one of the ways it was used was basically to pump and dump and bring people in who would prototype. I think they used a lot of the people who built Bitcoin rails and Bitcoin companies to help them figure out how to do the distributed ledger technology and how to apply it to different financial products. So here's the thing, and it's very typical of the guys who run the financial system. When you wanna get something like programmable money prototyped, you can't go hire, the top 1,000 software developers because they don't wanna work for you, and they certainly don't wanna build a control system, right? So, what you wanna do is you wanna put out prototypes where they embrace it because they think they're gonna be free and it's gonna do all these wonderful things, and then they run around and develop it, and it's a way of testing and trying things. There's a wonderful book I recommend to you, by Tim Wu called The Master Switch, and it's about the history of information technology and how a new technology comes along, and there's a period when all these entrepreneurs grab it and say, "It's wonderful, it could do this, it could do that," and 1,000 flowers bloom, and then wham, all of a sudden it consolidates into a handful of the same old companies and further central control. And then another one comes along and there's this blossoming and then wham. And um and that's what happened with crypto, and when the time was ready, the big boys came in and took it over. And so now essentially the biggest player in the Bitcoin market is BlackRock.
With ETFs, I think MicroStrategy still owns the most Bitcoin. But yeah, I mean, I've long made the point that it's been a concern of mine that Bitcoin was supposed to be decentralized, but it's now been worked into the very financial system that it was
Right.
supposed to be an exit for, and you're not actually owning the uh, currency yourself if you're owning an ETF, and it's lost its ethos once we've put on these, derivatives and all of these other products on top of it, that it stopped being a people's currency. But I did like the idea in principle. I did like the,
Yeah, 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 yeah. So in the 90s, we invented something in Hamilton Securities called just-in-time money. We're working with technologists from Silicon Valley, and I was all excited about what the possibilities of digital money, what it could be and how much financial liquidity could bring because it comes back to the fact that this technology could just do fabulous and wonderful things.
So let's bring it back to, technology, because we can't stop progress, right? And I understand that your point is that we need, guardrails here. And you made a point earlier that every 80 or 100 or so years, there is a change in the monetary system. And if we stretch out history over thousands of years, there's always some big monetary change. We talk a lot about global monetary systems on this show, the bifurcation of the global monetary system, the dollar potentially losing its role as the, king of global reserve currencies, or at least as a reserve asset. How does all of this, fit into it? Because, from the United States perspective, you could see why you would want stable coins. That's a way of preserving dollar dominance. If you get other countries to use stable coins, then effectively you, as the United States, are maintaining your hegemony of the financial system. And if you're running the United States government, why wouldn't you do that? Isn't that your job to do that?
So here's the thing. It's more than just maintaining dollar dominance. So let me go back. Do you remember when the wall came down in Berlin?
Hmm.
So I think you would have been 14?
We won't talk about that. We'll gloss over exactly how old I may or may not have been there. But yeah, I know
But
what we're talking about.
I'm very, very old, and I remember. So what happened was the wall comes down, and I'm in Washington, I'm around all the people who are running the government, and there's all these conversations. "Oh my god, we can unify Germany. It'll take 10 years. We have to have treaties and conferences," and they're envisioning all sorts of complicated stuff. And the head of Germany simply offered a very sweet premium for the East German currency to come into the Deutschmark. Bam! Everybody swaps to Deutschmark, company unified overnight through the currency. Okay? Imagine you wake up in a world, and I don't think this is gonna happen, but it could. Imagine you wake up, so you know about a tender in the stock market. One company tenders for the stock of another company, buys that company's stock, and then takes over the company, right? Okay, so it's a takeover.
Right.
If you go out the United States and you get everybody to move off of their local currency and into stablecoins financing the US Treasury market, you implode all their local economies and banking systems, but essentially they all become, a form of citizen of the dollar syndicate, right? I mean, basically, you shift their sovereignty from one
Right.
country to another. It is you are tendering for 8 billion people in the open market.
Which is genius, as per the Genius Act, if your goal is to maintain dollar dominance and US hegemony over the financial system. Why wouldn't you do that
Right,
if you're the government of the United States and that's your
right.
objective?
But wait, keep thinking, because it's not just getting the money into the dollars. Now you can do surveillance on all those people, and
Mhm.
now you can freeze, block, or burn their transactions. So you have more power over them than their government may have.
So then wouldn't we get pushback from the likes of China and even the European Union and other countries
Right.
that wouldn't want this because not only do they lose power over their own citizens potentially, but also lose dominance in the global
Right.
monetary
So
system?
we're gonna see countries trying to block our internet access or our payment, our mobile payment systems, and we're gonna see countries, around the world outlaw, you can't use a US stablecoin, things like that. So the war is on, but countries are now gonna have to compete one by one for their citizens to use their currency.
So, how do you see this in the next 10 years or 5
So
years or
I'm
whatever
I'm
timeline you
trying
think?
so there's an expression we used to always use on Wall Street. I won't use the exact expression. It's called a cluster, you know what. I think this is gonna be the biggest cluster, you know what, in the history of the world. I think this is gonna be a complete mess. I just spent 44 hours flying to Amsterdam in a flight setup that should have been 20 hours. Planes were breaking down, and the problem in that system was that everybody was rebooked and their luggage was rebooked by automatic programming, and the automatic programming wasn't working. And you had a group of humans, both the ground crews, the flight crews, and the customers trying to deal with a technocratic automatic programming software that had gone mad and was not making any sense. And, and so a great deal of time was wasted. People were very frustrated, on and on and on. That's just for air flight travel. When you take everybody's financial transactions and you throw them into a system that is that is freezing, blocking, manipulating, and there's no one to call, there's no customer support, there's no human intercession, I just can't imagine the mess you're gonna make. I think this is gonna be the greatest cluster, you know what, in the history of the world. So,
So, should we take comfort in that, that it's just gonna blow itself up or
I take a great deal of comfort in that. So, but I don't underestimate the damage that it could do. in the meantime, and I would hate to see this is something where a great deal of family wealth could just be stolen or taken or inflated away, and I don't look forward to that whatsoever.
So I get that when it is implemented, it can lead to the greatest cluster, FUCK, well, keep it clean. Um, but we still need, well, not we, they still need to get this implemented, right? So,
I
where are we in the process today? What
so
developments are
so
you watching?
so I think, they're a couple years away from getting the basic infrastructure, underground cables, data centers, getting it all working. I think they are a couple years away from getting the digital ID system really tight. I think they're moving very quickly on programmable money, particularly the stocks and bonds and the bank deposits. And so that is moving very fast. And how fast they can do it, if you look at how fast they say they can do it, I just don't believe them. I think it's going to take longer than that. So to me, it looks like you know, it's they're gonna make enormous progress in the next year or 2, and that's why this year or 2 is our year or 2 where we need to do everything we can to push back and do the things we can do, which is a lot.
Well, before we get into what we can do, are there specific milestones that you're watching that would make you say, wow, we're moving much faster than I expected?
I think the banks announcing that they're gonna put bank deposits on the distributed ledger, and they just announced that a week or 2 ago. That is frightening because it takes away potentially takes away one of the most valuable alternatives to money on a distributed ledger. The ACH system, the bank deposit system, checks, that's an alternative to program that's non-programmable money. Yes, it can be surveilled, but it's only got a manual third lock. It's not an automated lock system, and if the banks move everything onto an automated lock, that is really scary. Now, the fact that the stocks and bonds are doing it at the same time as the banks means everything's moving to a distributed ledger. Everything can be made programmable on a distributed
Mhm.
ledger and can be misused, in these various ways. So, we've just seen a dramatic shift in the last 2 months,
Right.
but the Clarity Act is still not passed. So, how fast can they go? It depends on how much pain they're willing to deliver. They can go very fast.
And of course, you're talking about tokenization of real world assets, tokenization of everything from, equities to homes to pieces of land. That's a trend that's moving. I always say that, for everyone that benefits from that, there are people who are losing business. And in many cases, that's a traditional banking system. And as you said, you didn't think you'd be agreeing with Jamie Dimon, but perhaps, they are the allies in this fight because they want to keep their control. But let's
Well, no,
assume
I don't think it's just their control. They understand where financial liquidity comes from, and they understand if you suck all that money out of local economies and out of the tax base, you implode the economy. You
why does it
literally
suck out all of the money though?
well, because if you're going to send instead of lending money to local enterprise, if the banking system is instead delivering all the money into the treasury market and the only people who has money locally are people who get a welfare check or a government contract, then private enterprise shrinks to nothing, particularly in small businesses depending on bank and credit. So you've just massively deflated the local economy and the tax base of many municipalities and governments. And then you're talking about if you look at all the debt that they carry at the state and local level, when you implode that tax base, bam, you implode all that debt.
So if we're having this conversation 5 years from now, what do you expect would have changed in the lives of ordinary people? What does that look like?
It's uh, very complex. It's not simple. And different people have different baskets of situations. So, but I think you are going to see generally across the board uh, a much lower quality of life and lower life expectancy in the general population, and significantly less family wealth. I think a lot of it could be inflated away. Now, the corollary to that is we are now seeing rolling out technology which could dramatically improve all sorts of productivity and material well-being, but I have a hard time seeing the current leadership allow that to trickle down to the general population. So, I think we're looking at a lower life expectancy, lower, net worth, and lower freedom of movement and speech and life. So, now the question is, can 5 to 10% of us lead a pushback that will be effective? And if we do, then it's gonna be a very, very different picture, and that's the picture where the new technology can be a huge blessing. So, I think it's an age-old question. It's a spiritual war. Is it gonna be ruled by divine intelligence or demonic? And that's gonna be decided one person and one home at a time.
So let's unpack that. Let's focus on that pushback. What is that pushback?
So that pushback is using cash. That pushback is keeping analog alive. That pushback is changing the laws or instituting laws so that people have a right to a non-digital life. That pushback is putting into guardrails on programmable money. And that pushback is doing everything we can in our life to stop building the prison and stop financing the prison, and instead shifting our money to finance and build the world we want to live in. So Americans are pouring their retirement savings into building these data centers, and I think they don't even realize it.
Well, they're doing that because for many, they're seeing their purchasing power decline holding dollars. So they're doing that as a way to create wealth, to increase their ability to survive or thrive, rather. So let's look at some practical solutions here because, most people watching are not going to give up their smartphones. I'm not suggesting that you're saying that they should, but they're
Mhm.
not abandoning modern life.
Right.
What can ordinary people do? They're not gonna stop using credit cards. Maybe they'll use cash a little bit more here and there, but a lot of stores do not even accept cash. That's a whole other conversation. But if
You need to
some
come to Hickory Valley, Tennessee. Everybody accepts cash.
well, you gotta have a population flood there in Tennessee, but there's so many stores where they say, "We do not accept cash." So if someone does wanna preserve their freedom, their sovereignty, their privacy, their optionality, what can they practically do now? Where can they start?
So what you wanna do is you wanna do all the actions you can take, but you wanna take them in a way that empowers you. So so what we can do, I showed you this book, and you can go to the Solari Report, you'll have the link up, it's free, you can download the PDF, you can print it out, it's called Coming Clean, and it's a buffet of ideas of what you can do to to change your life in a way that will give you more power and protection in this circumstance, and sort of get the bad guys out of your wallet, get them out of your head. Get you taking the actions that protect your health, that protect your food, that protect your money, and do it in a way that makes you healthier and richer. And so we walk you through, and for every one of the 24 steps in the buffet, there's a wealth of resources at the Solari Report or on the internet to help you do that. So, one example that I always use is getting a good bank where you have a good relationship, and if the FBI, call up and say you're a domestic terrorist, they'll just start laughing. So so there are millions of things you can do, but you have to do them in a way that decreases your enemy's power and increases your power, because you need more power to deal with the situation.
You've been saying people should use cash and hold on to cash. What about gold? I mean, obviously,
So,
we're
yeah,
advocates of using or having physical gold.
so cash is for transactions, gold is for store of value. In my opinion, after the people that I love in my family, who to me are the primary assets, I think gold is one of the great assets of the world. And gold has positive and negative. So if you measure your value in dollars, the price of gold can be volatile. If you measure your value in ounces, it's not volatile at all. But I think gold, if you look at how gold has performed over the last 20 years, but over the last 5,000 years, we have a great wrap up on, 5,000 years of gold history. And we do a lot of work on gold at the Solari Report. And gold, the great thing about gold is it's simple. You can understand it, and there's no third party dependency if you store it on your own. I think the most important decision you have to make when you buy gold is, and before you buy it, is you have to know where you're going to put it. So I have to tell you that I was an investment advisor for 10 years, and the number one way my clients lost money on gold,
How storage fees?
they forgot where they put it.
Oh, wow. That's why you need a gold map, like the
Right,
pirates had.
right. So you need to keep, just like you have a password book, you need to keep a record of where you put your gold. But I've had people, throw out their socks and forget there were a couple cougar ants in those socks. They gave it to Goodwill. So whoever bought those socks had quite a surprise.
You'd
Um,
think you'd feel that, the weight of the Krugerrands in those socks, but I get your broader point that people just lose track of. They must have so much gold if they lose track of where they keep it. That's probably a good thing for
so
them.
but there are real security issues on how you secure it and then the fees that you pay. And so we did a third quarter 2024 wrap up where we went through all of our links on gold and silver. And the one thing we stress again and again is get yourself educated before you buy gold, because you need to know. I divide gold investment between a core position and investment position. The core position is central bank insurance, and it's there for the worst case. We have a great commentary called "What Percentage of My Assets Should I Hold in Precious Metals?" And your core, everybody should have a core position. If you don't have one, you need to get it as soon as you understand where you're going to keep it. It's an insurance policy. It's not an investment. But then an investment position depends on when you're buying, exactly what you're buying, where you're keeping it, and it very much depends on the investment cycle that we're in. So, and I think right now gold is attractive both as a core position and as an investment position, and I think it's everybody everybody with some exception should have some in their portfolio.
Catherine, you've put together all of these resources to help people to have practical solutions, to make people aware of what's going on, the dangers that could be around the corner with the digital matrix and other issues. I mean, you've covered a lot of other problems and secrets and issues with the financial system at large. Why? What motivates you to do this?
So it was very interesting. I was one of those people who, I felt litigation or fighting was a complete waste of time. And I grew up in a world where you didn't fight City Hall. You might try and lead City Hall and persuade it in another direction, but you'd never fight it. And I went through a period where twice I had my fortune pulled out from under me, but basically lawlessness and dirty tricks. And so the second time I was in 1998, I was offered a quickie settlement, but they were going to keep my money. And I decided, look, there's a line between liberty and slavery, and this is the line. And so I decided, I'm not putting up with this. And the other thing is I've been trained always to believe that I was part of a people who tried to lead a civilization, and that we were civilized people and we wanted to build a great civilization. And I'll never forget realizing in 1998 what their plan was. And I said, this is going to fail, and I want no part of it. I don't want to be around. Uh, I don't want to be responsible. So I'm going to go out in the wilderness and see if I can find some other people who want to come up with a better plan, because this plan's going to fail. And what I've had to do since then is watch the United States, you know, steadily decline as a culture, as a financial system, as a country. And it's horrible for me, but I'm working with people all over the world who are trying to do something about it, and build a world where if we make money, we can keep it. I mean, I think that's what you do at Miles Franklin. You try and help people keep the money and preserve the money that they've made. And in a sense, I'm doing the same thing. The problem is I can't be free unless everybody is. And the problem we have is we have a secret governance system that is wreaking havoc with the monetary, policies, and now want to wreak havoc with fiscal policies. and I've just decided to do something about it, and I can't think of anything I'd rather do. What am I gonna do? Build another fortune so they can steal it again? You know, that's the tragedy. I'm watching all these people in the crypto space building these fortunes knowing that it can be stolen from them just like that. They're building the train tracks to steal all the money they're making. Why would you do that? You know? There's a great scene in it's Godfather 2, I think, where the Godfather is explaining why he went into crime, and he said he didn't wanna be he just didn't wanna be a patsy on the string, some expression like that.
Mhm.
Yeah, so
Well, Catherine, we are all very grateful for your time and for your work and for your research and for your insight. What would you say is your final warning as we wrap up here? And more importantly, your final message of hope?
So my warning is that never underestimate the power of what you can do if you try. If 5 to 10% of us really do what we can to lead towards a much more human civilization, anything's possible. And if we fail and they get a complete control grid, that's not a world I want to live in anyway. So you know, I never worry about that world. I use 100% of my concentration to try and build something worth living in. And it's all I can tell you is it's a great way to live. And the people I associate with, I just had a colleague from Iceland who traveled around America with me. He came and drove me 5,000 miles. It was wonderful. And I said to him, "Why are you doing this?" And he said, "Because everywhere I go with you, I meet the most fabulous people." So I'm sure you do. I'm sure Miles Franklin's just has unbelievable, wonderful customers, and you see it. So the world is full of wonderful people, and when you get into cahoots with them to do, to go to lead to a place where you wanna live, it's a good life. So I recommend it. Don't sit around and think it's hopeless. Don't say, "This is where they're gonna go, and so I'm just gonna go with them." It's not a world you want your children or grandchildren to be part of.
And I know you give some very specific ways to do that in the Solari report. So as we wrap up here, Catherine, where can people learn more about your work?
Solari.com, we have, I would suggest you start with Coming Clean. It's free. Anybody can download. You can take it down to Kinko's, make 100 copies, whatever you want. But we'd love to have you as a subscriber, and that's basically who we work for. We work for our subscribers, and we believe our job is to help you navigate this environment and be successful in this environment. No matter how terrible things are, people always find a way to be successful, and I believe it's possible, even in the midst of this, to be successful. So
Well, Catherine, thank you very much. Thank you for fighting the good fight. Thank you for helping others do it. And thank you for spending so much time with us here today. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. And as always, thank you for watching. Thank you for spending your time with us. We know your time is valuable, and we really appreciate you choosing to spend it here. So please subscribe and help us grow this community, and go ahead and leave us your comments. We definitely do read them. We love hearing from you. And thanks to all of those who submitted guest suggestions. We are working on that. Please do suggest more. Let us know also if there are any topics you would like us to explore. As always, feel free to praise, whine, or just opine. And if you would like to learn more about building a precious metal strategy, you can reach out to info@milesfranklin.com. There's a team of specialized advisors and brokers that can guide you. If you mention my name, I'll even give you an extra special deal. Also, check out the website, milesfranklin.com. There is also a weekly newsletter that you don't want to miss. It has previews, specials. It also has some exclusive macro insights. There is a link in the description to sign up for it, and it's also on the website, milesfranklin.com. So thank you again for watching. We will see you soon. Until then, stay sovereign.
This is The Real Story with Michelle Makori.